Hey everyone, welcome to the back half, where we talk about books and all kinds of interesting things. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about my to be read pile because I spent a lot of time complaining about the state of my to be read pile, which is less of a pile and more like a metastasizing stack taking over my office and bedroom. Despite my best efforts, I still find myself adding to them because I can't help myself when something sounds interesting. And there's always something that sounds interesting. That's the beauty of books. I've been finding interesting things and then not getting around to them for decades at this point. I could easily go for a few years only reading books I've bought but haven't started or finished. The thought to do so occasionally crosses my mind, especially when staring at all the books I have yet to find shelf space for that confront me every morning. Naturally, I respond to that thought by deciding to reread something I finished and shelved a long time ago. And not just anything at the moment. I have finally given in to a nearly overwhelming urge I've had for the past few months to pick up Robert Jordan's The Eye of the World, the first volume in his famed Wheel of Time series. Yep, in the face of all my unread novels and histories, I've chosen to jump back into a mammoth 14-book fantasy series where each novel runs like 800 plus pages. Yeah, as they say, that boy ain't right. Funny enough, I was not a fantasy boy growing up. I read The Hobbit really young, but bounced hard off of the Lord of Rings trilogy, which to this day I haven't read. No pitchforks, please. I made a couple of half-hearted attempts at other books like Stephen Donaldson's Lord Fowl's Bane and Roger Zelazny's Chronicles of Amber, and I bounced off them just as hard. All the standard fantasy tropes, dragons or princesses, and chosen one quest stories just didn't appeal to me. Science fiction and horror were my jam, and very little could shake me out of those. I think what actually changed my mind in the end can be summed up in two words: Final Fantasy. Starting with Final Fantasy VII on my original PlayStation and continuing through the entire series, I got myself hooked on those same tropes. It helped that Final Fantasy VII dressed those tropes up in sci-fi drag, but even the less tech-centered high fantasy installments that followed had me hooked. Turns out that having a passion for role-playing games translates into a sudden onset of appreciation for fantasy literature. In the years since, I've torn through many high-profile fantasy series, including a staggering number of Terry Brooks' Shannara series. I'm particularly fond of Tad Williams, whose Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy manages to take all those tropes and weave something that feels classic in its homages, yet modern in its telling. And of course, I've read Game of Thrones, which I won't be going back to reread unless I'm certain it will finally be finished. Maybe nuts, but I'm not that nuts. Wheel of Time is actually complete, even though Jordan died in 2007 with the final three books unfinished. Brandon Sanderson, another weirdly prolific fantasy writer I enjoy, stepped in to wrap up the series based on Jordan's work and outlines, with the blessing of Jordan's wife, who was also his editor. So I won't get literary blue balls retackling this series. I'm already well into the second book, The Great Hunt. I'll be writing and saying more about this series as I once again make my way through it, since it's been nearly 20 years since I originally read it. Jordan's fantasy world owes as much to Dune as it does to Tolkien, with incredibly complex and convoluted world building and political intrigue. I'm specifically reading it through a gender-focused lens this time, which is appropriate for a series where the world's magic power is explicitly split into male and female halves, with the male half being tainted by evil and women wielding immense magical and political power. Jordan has taken some hits for his supposed gender essentialism, and I recall some spanking stuff around halfway through that doesn't help his case. But I don't remember it being quite so cut and dried. He works through many permutations of how such a world might grow and falter. But perhaps my memory is being influenced by Amazon's Wheel of Time television series that took some interesting swings at the source material and then promptly got canceled when it got really good. Jeff Bezos needed to focus his resources on destroying the Washington Post instead. I'll be revisiting the books here in groups as a longer-term project for 2026 and possibly 2027. It'll take a while because I have another reading project that I'll be announcing here next month that means I'll need to suppress my urge to reread giant-ass novels for the next few months. So many books, so little time. And stay tuned for what's coming. It's going to be a lot of fun. Speaking of reading in big books, 2 years ago I wrote a review at the back half of my then latest technology acquisition, the Kindle Scribe, a combination e-ink tablet for note-taking and writing, as well as an oversized ebook reader. A few months later, I wrote a follow up, noting how deeply the scribe had become integrated into my daily work and personal life, noting that I loved being able to take notes within the text of the ebook, a then kind of new feature, and I was able to access those notes fairly easily through my Mac. All these months later, the scribe is still a major part of my daily life. Sheets of yellow paper and post it notes remain banished from my desktop, thank God. I take it everywhere, so I'm always ready to take notes on a meeting, scribble down otherwise fleeting ideas, or dip into one of the many, many ebooks I've collected over the years. Well, actually, scratch that last one. I've reverted to old fashioned books on paper in a major way, and in large part because of my scribe. I've not adopted some anti ebook attitude. I think ebooks are great, and I still grab a few here and there. Since my scribe is always with me, that means I always have something to read that's not my damn phone. What actually happened was I started taking too many notes. Jotting notes inside the text seemed super useful at first, especially for books I plan to write and talk about here at the back half. But I started hitting some roadblocks, primarily that the space was limited to fairly short notes, and as time went on, I found the Kindle app on my Mac to be less and less capable of managing my notes, as well as my highlighted passages, which made it frustrating rather than illuminating when trying to reference them. I realized I was having a much easier time when I was reading physical books and taking notes in the scribe, despite my initial concerns about a disconnect between my thoughts and the page. Taking those notes on the scribe, where I could scribble out a few hundred words of thoughts and questions with no problem or space issues, I could then export them to my Mac, began to free me up. Given my near genetic level aversion to writing in books, this was still a big deal for me in my process. I want to be clear here in the writing on books thing. I'm not some collectible focused dilettante who obsesses over maintaining every book I own in mint condition. Books are made to be read, and the act of reading is going to inflict some wear and occasional tear on them. Still, I am a stickler that they should be handled as gently as possible. Every time I see a person reading a paperback with the front cover bent all the way back around, a piece of my heart dies. If I see you marking your place in a book by folding down the corner, you can be certain I'm judging you. Use a business card like a caring person does. You can imagine how I feel when I see some rando posting on Book Talk with a video of their pages underlined and highlighted into full spread rainbows, plus scribbles in the margin, plus posted arrows. It sends shivers up my spine. How does anyone even make sense of performative annotations anyway? Now here I am, full circle, yet again expanding my already bursting personal library with new hardbacks and trade paperbacks. Pour one out for my beloved and defunct mass market paperbacks. Though I am making far more use of my local library to keep my expenditure somewhat reasonable, I'm not completely crazy. Luckily, there are no sides to be chosen here. Reading is reading, and while there are aspects of physical books I'll always love, the smell of an older book, the weight of it on your chest when you start to take a nap, it doesn't mean I hate the alternatives. There was a dust-up last week on Threads, our most perplexing social media app, over whether or not listening to audiobooks counts as reading. That made me understand why I don't check Threads that often. So go read a book, however you prefer, ebook, print, whatever. Doesn't bother me, just don't write in it. If you do, don't tell me. Thanks everybody for listening. See you next time at the back half.